On a warm summer night in August of 1976, four friends were sitting around a blazing campfire in the middle of the Maine wilderness. They had been out there for days, fishing, canoeing, living off the grid, no distractions, just silence, stars, and the occasional call of a loon echoing across the lake. Around midnight, the four men push off from shore in a canoe. They're looking to do some night fishing under the stars. But they don't get far before they see something in the sky. A light. Bright, silent, and moving strangely. At first they think it might be a helicopter, but this thing, it doesn't make a sound. And then, just as quickly as it begins, it descends and a beam of light suddenly bursts out of its base and locks onto their canoe. The light lights up the lake. They panic. They start paddling as fast as they can toward the shore, and then everything goes black. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the eerie. Today we're diving into one of the most chilling and controversial alien abduction cases in U.S. history, the Allagash Abductions. In 1976, four young men, Jim and Jack Weiner, Chuck Rack, and Charlie Foltz, packed up their gear and drove north from Massachusetts into the thick, untouched wilderness of northern Maine. Their destination, the Allagash Wilderness Waterway. Now, if you've never been there, it's just miles upon miles of dense pine forests, glassy black lakes that stretch onto the horizon, and just no sign of civilization in any direction. No roads, no cabins, just you, your canoe, and the woods. All four of these men were art students in their early 20s. They were outdoorsy, creative, and just looking for an adventure. They weren't survival experts or military guys, just regular guys who liked nature and wanted a break from city life. Their plan was just to spend 2 weeks canoeing, fishing, and hiking through the wilderness, taking in the scenery, maybe sketching a few landscapes along the way, and just overall have a good time with friends relaxing in nature. These guys were all really close, more like brothers than friends. They trusted each other with their lives, and none of them had any idea that this trip would alter their entire futures. Over the first few days, everything went according to plan. They fished, they laughed, they traveled deeper into the woods, deeper into isolation. By day 4, they were camping near a remote section of Eagle Lake, a place so quiet that they could almost hear their own heartbeats at night. But that night, they did something a little bit different. They decided to go out on the lake for some night fishing. So they built a massive campfire before heading out. They wanted to make sure that the fire was big enough to be seen from the lake so that they could easily find their way back. So on that fourth night, the sun had dipped below the treetops and the wilderness was cloaked in a pitch-black darkness. The only light came from the roaring fire and the shimmering surface of Eagle Lake. It stretched out before him like a mirror in the night sky. After admiring the beauty for a moment, the guys pushed off in their canoe. Jim and Jack were in the front, and Chuck and Charlie were in the back. They carried only a flashlight, their fishing gear, and the knowledge that the fire on shore would guide them home. And they paddled out maybe 150 feet from shore, and the lake was still silent. The only movement and the only sound was from the men. That's when Jack looked up, and he saw this really bright star. But right off, he noticed that it was moving, slowly and steadily, and completely silently. But then, without warning, it began to zigzag across the sky in impossible patterns. Left, right, straight up, dead stop, then another sharp turn. Whatever this was, it was definitely not a plane or helicopter. And then it got closer and closer. But still, this thing didn't make a sound. Then light suddenly stopped and hovered, and then from the bottom of it, a beam of light shot down. It was like a crazy bright spotlight. It lit up like the stadium lights, and then it moved. The beam locked onto the canoe. For a split second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke, and then pure panic set in. They started paddling with everything they had back to the shore. But as they moved, the beam followed them. It stayed locked on, just tracking their every motion like a predator. Charlie turned around and aimed the flashlight at the object, and as soon as the beam of his flashlight hit, everything went white. Then, the next thing they knew, they were on the shore, standing, just there. No memory of paddling back, no memory of getting out of the canoe, nothing. They looked at the fire that they had built just before they left. That huge, blazing fire. Now it was barely smoldering, which meant hours had passed. But to them, it felt like minutes. They were dazed, exhausted, and Jack described the feeling later as this heaviness in the air. Something unspoken passed between them. None of them said a word about what had happened. Not that night, nor the next day, not for years. But something had happened, and deep down, they all knew it. After that night on Eagle Lake, the four men packed up and ended their trip. They went home, back to classes, jobs, girlfriends. Life carried on, at least on the outside. But something had changed, something they couldn't put into words. And for the next few years, none of them really talked about what they saw, because none of them really knew what they'd seen. But then, nearly 20 years later, the past came back. Jim Weiner, one of the twins, started suffering from sudden, violent seizures. Doctors couldn't explain them, and then the nightmares began. He would wake up in a cold sweat, trembling, unable to breathe. In his dreams, he was lying flat on a metal table, surrounded by figures, not human, tall, thin, gray, with long fingers and huge black eyes. He was being examined, prodded, poked, studied like an insect under a microscope, and then he'd wake up. Eventually, Jim confided in his brother Jack, and what Jack said next made his blood run cold. He had been having the same nightmares. In fact, so had Charlie, and so had Chuck. 4 men from 4 different homes, all plagued by the same dream, the same beings, the same memories of that night at the lake. Jim eventually reached out to Jay Fowler, a well-known UFO researcher affiliated with the Mutual UFO Network. Ray listened to their story and suggested that they undergo something called hypnotic regression therapy. Now, if you're not familiar with it, hypnotic regression is a method used to access repressed memories, particularly in trauma cases. The idea is that the mind locks away things it can't handle, but under hypnosis, sometimes it lets go. Each man was hypnotized separately. Different sessions, different days, no contact with each other beforehand. And yet, their stories matched. They all described being taken aboard a craft, each of them lifted by that beam and brought into a cold, metallic room filled with blinding white light. They were separated from one another, stripped, placed on hard tables, and the beings didn't speak, not with words anyway, but the men said that they heard them in their minds. The creatures examined them, inserted tools into their mouths, their noses, even their genitals. One of the men said he felt like a specimen. Another said he felt like he was going to die. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. They were back in the canoe, back on shore, like nothing had happened, except everything had. So, what really happened to Jim, Jack, Charlie, and Chuck that night on Eagle Lake? If you ask them, they'll tell you exactly what they remember, because they've never changed their story. Not once. Even now, decades later, they maintain every word of it. But of course, not everyone believes them. Skeptics point out that all 4 men were artists, creative types, people capable of constructing a shared narrative. Some have suggested that they created the story for attention, a hoax, maybe even an inside joke that went too far. There's also the matter of hypnotic regression. Studies have shown that hypnosis can lead to false memories, especially if the person conducting the session asks leading questions, even unintentionally. The brain is complicated, and in situations involving trauma or missing time, it has a way of filling in the blanks, sometimes with dreams, sometimes stories, and sometimes with things that feel real, even if they're not. And then there's Chuck Rack. Years after the event, he gave an interview where he said he didn't remember being abducted like the others. He didn't deny that something strange happened, but he cast doubt on the alien abduction part of the story. And that's significant because if even one of the four men isn't completely on board, it makes you wonder. And he didn't remember anything different, just not what they remembered. And despite his doubts, he never accused them of lying. The other three have stood firm for nearly 50 years. They didn't write a book, they didn't go to a media tour, they weren't trying to get rich or famous. In fact, they mostly kept to themselves. And that's what makes this story so hard to shake. There's no clear motive, no obvious benefit, just four men, a strange light, missing time, and matching memories of a night they all wish they could forget. Nearly 5 decades have passed since that night. The trees still stand and the water still ripples in the moonlight, and the Allagash still draws adventurers looking to escape into the wild. But for four men, that place is more than just a stretch of wilderness. It's a scar, a question mark etched in their memories, one that time hasn't erased. They went into those woods expecting a quiet peace, maybe catch a few fish, but what they got was a blank space in time, a white light and memories that surfaced years later, buried so deep that they needed hypnosis just to reach them. Were they abducted? Were their memories real? Or did their minds, pushed to the edge by fear and confusion, invent some extraordinary event to make sense of the unknown? The truth is, we don't know, and we might never know. But here's what we do know. They never asked for fame. They never asked for attention. They didn't want to be the center of a UFO story that would haunt them the rest of their lives. And yet, when you hear their voices, when you see their faces and listen to their stories, there's something in their eyes, a weight, a truth that feels real. So the next time you're out in the woods, staring up at the stars, wondering what's out there, just remember, in 1976, 4 men were doing the exact same thing, and they gave back with a story that still gives people chills to this day. A story they never asked for. A story that started with a light in the sky and ended inside something not of this world. That's it for today's episode of Legends May Live. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend who loves an odd tale. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep a lookout, because legends may live.